Finding your way into the workplace sometimes means completing an internship in order to get some of the experience you need. But the number of students willing to do that for free, well, that number's falling. New numbers from the National Association of Colleges and Employers show the percentage of American students taking unpaid internships is down nearly 10% from 2012. Canada might soon see a similar decline, with the Liberal government now vowing to make good on an election promise, and that is to end unpaid internships in federal workplaces anyway. Joining us now is Will Webb. He's the Director of Law Reform at the Canadian Intern Association. Good to have you with us this morning.
Thanks, good to be here.
Why are we going to see now this increase towards paid internships?
I think that we're going to see an increase toward paid internships in part because the law has changed. So since 2017, the provincial government introduced new legislation that would make unpaid internships that are not part of an academic program illegal. I think also there was previously a lot of misinformation out there amongst employers. A lot of employers thought that I can simply call this person an intern and I don't have to pay them. Well, that wasn't the law back then, and that's not the law now. And in fact, the provincial government narrowed those restrictions, and the federal government is looking at introducing similar legislation that would narrow those gaps as well.
Yeah, you mentioned Ontario. In 2015, the review found 18 out of 77 workplaces were doing what you just described, saying, you know, calling somebody an unpaid intern when really that is someone who should have been compensated. So what is the criteria job seekers should look for when they're considering an internship? What are their rights?
I think there are a few things that interns and job seekers should consider when they're looking for internships. The first thing that they should consider is the internship paid? If the internship is unpaid, then it needs to be part of a formal school program. And I think there's been a big shift in the mentality among students and young workers as of late. Previously, there was kind of the idea of, oh, I'll take on this unpaid internship in order to get a foot in the door. But now what we're seeing is students refusing to take that work, young workers refusing to take on unpaid work because, frankly, it's unfair. If they're performing work for an employer who's deriving a benefit, then they should be paid.
Well, what about this idea of, you know, for every person who says no to an unpaid internship, there is going to be somebody who says, look, I'll take it, I'll do it for free because I want the experience?
That's certainly an issue. And I think what we also need to look at, some of the kind of systemic issues underlying that is asking ourselves the question, who can afford to take on an unpaid internship? Who can afford to work for free? And I think that's why these changes are so important, because we need to look at who's getting into those internships. And, you know, as we know, the interns of today are the managers and employers of the future. So we need perspectives from all different walks of life in order to reflect that.
You know, other than wages that are owed and should have been paid, what are some of the other common complaints that you hear happening to interns?
One of the most common complaints that we see has to do with hours of work. So often unpaid interns have to undertake paid work as well just to cover basic living expenses. Unfortunately, there have been a couple of tragic deaths where unpaid interns who were performing an unpaid internship as part of a formal school program were also doing paid work as well. And they fell asleep at the wheel while driving, unfortunately got in car accidents and passed away. So we need to see those standards being raised so that interns are protected. And currently the federal government is looking at developing some regulations in order to protect interns along those lines.
There's laws in place around this now. What happens to companies who break the laws around interns?
So if companies break the law around internships, what they might see are fines from the government. They might see additional reviews or audits. And in addition, what interns can do is they can file for back pay. So in Canada, there's a split between federal and provincial law. In Ontario, currently, it's illegal for employers to offer unpaid internships that aren't part of formal school programs. So if you are an intern who has performed that kind of work since the legislation has passed, then you can file for back pay and you can receive the payback that you should have received in the first place.
Lots of great information, Will. Thanks so much for coming on this morning.
Thanks for having me.